Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Chapter 14, Triguna Vibhaga Yoga, the distinction of the trigunas. Twofold purpose of this chapter 14. First one is to allow us or to provide us with a model whereby we're no longer confined to our defaulted way of thinking when it comes to evaluating or assessing the conditionalities of the world. So without this knowledge, what's the usual response? If we see something that we do not understand, what happens? The person defaults back to their ways of understanding, usually on the basis of what they've or how they have reacted before. The extreme version of it is the person swears because they just do not know what to say. You know, how dare this person says that or this? Or there's a sense of anger, or there's a sense of frustration. And all of this comes out of having a limited amount of knowledge. In fact, you and I have both noticed that the more knowledge we have pertaining to a subject area, the more it expands our horizon, it expands our capacity to perceive it in a higher engaged way, in a much more way that is closer to what is versus to mixed in with our emotions, mixed in with our perceptions, mixed in with our personal opinions. So like that, the model of chapter 14, the trigunas, allows us to see the world through the eyes of the trigunas. The trigunas, which are, as I discussed last week, the first one is this is a new chart, just the same one as the previous, it's just formed in a different way. Sattva-Guna, from the standpoint of the macrocosm, is the revealing power. I don't know if you can see that. Before I get into these three gunas, Rajas being the projecting power, Tamas being the concealing power, just want to give you a quick metaphor how to understand these three gunas again. I know I've mentioned this last week, however, I want to give you a different alternative model. If you, for example, think of fire, fire has the power to burn. It has the power to radiate. It has the power to illumine. Now, all of these powers are inherent in the fire, and they're never apart from the fire. Like that, Maya, or these three gunas, are never apart from Brahman. Or another example is if you think of a person, and suppose the person has three skills. They have skill 1, skill 2, and skill 3. Those skills are never apart from the person. And yet, they do not define the person. The person wields those skills whenever that person wishes. Just like that, Ishvara wields the power of Maya, wields these three gunas according to the causal body of the universe. In other words, Ishvara, being the wielder of his Maya, of her Maya, by wielding so, these three gunas create the effects that we experience in this world. For example, we all have times whereby we suddenly receive a flash of insight, a flash of revealing. It's being revealed, being pondering upon a problem, a challenge, maybe in your workplace, maybe at home, maybe you've been presented some kind of a report or something that needs to get done, and you've been pondering it on for a while. And what happens is there's a flash of insights, revealing power. That's when Sattva-Guna has presented itself. So now suppose you remove the Sattva-Guna. That's when we suppose we have this concealing and the projecting power going on. And there's a little bit of Sattva. It's not like they're apart. They're always there together. But suppose these two, the bottom two, Rajas and Tamas, they are dominant at one moment. And we need to get something done. So in other words, clarity of what is not there. What's going to happen? I'm concealed what needs to be seen, what needs to be known. In other words, knowledge, which already exists in the field, is being concealed, just like gravity. It's already there, but it's being concealed due to the fact that it's not being investigated into. And only to the concealing, what's the person they're going to do? They're going to naturally project outwards. In other words, I'm going to project the next closest approximate to my ignorance, owing to Tamaguna, concealing power, and owing to rajaguna, the projecting power. So the world is governed by these three gunas, and we see this everywhere. We see, for example, when someone gives an amazing speech, an amazing, inspiring speech, and then we're all touched by it. It really touches you emotionally. You really relate to it. And you ask the person, where did that come from? And they say, I don't know. It just came through me. I was an instrument through which this knowledge or through which this poem or this whatever it is came through. So like that, we need to understand that end of the day, you are ultimately an instrument of the Lord. End of the day, you're just that through which these trigunas express. You do say, as I said last week, you do have some level of control, some level of interfacing, some level of engagement in and through all of your actions. However, ultimately, one needs to release this idea that I am the doer. And this idea that I need to do the sadhana, I need to do the meditation, I need to do the spiritual practice. I need to do so that I can enjoy. Because every time there's a thought of I need to do, what's reactivated? The sukshma sharira, the subtle body. Every single time we want or we ask, what should I do? Give me something to do. Teacher has two options. Number one, he can give you something to do. She can give you something to do. Or two, she can say, what is this need to do something? Just relax. Be what you already are right now. There is no effort you need to just be aware. There is no effort to exist. Everything else needs effort in the light of existence. Now, suppose, for example, I need to do this constantly, right? Move my hand like this to be aware, right? I'm aware because I'm moving my hand. And now when I stop moving my hand, okay, I'm aware again, okay? In other words, we don't need to do anything to be as we are because consciousness, the light of consciousness is always shining. In other words, when this chapter is over, what will be the statement? It will be like this. Having gone through these characteristics of these trigunas and how they express themselves in this world, your job is to, number one, recognize them whenever they are expressing through this instrument so that you may understand it and so that you may bless it. Say, aha, this is the instrumentation undergoing the conditionality of these trigunas according to the samskaras that are assigned to this one person, assigned to Lorena, assigned to Julie, assigned to Nagesh, assigned to Victor, and so on. In other words, they're assigned to every single person. Every single person's job is just to understand what is it that illumines the intellect and surrender to that, let go onto that, and let the body do what it does. Let the thinking do what it thinks. All the while, relax and be as you are. Because end of the day, if the person at the end of their life comes to a point of having heard this knowledge and they're still contemplating, okay, so I need to reject, right? I need to reject, not I. What is doing the rejection? The mind. In other words, every single time I say I am not I am reinforcing the doer. So ultimately, the person just has to own up to what they already are right now. And as I said, effortless, ordinary, actionless awareness is your truth. You need not do anything to be existence. Okay, now having introduced the primaries of these trigunas, again, the trigunas are Sattva-Guna, the revealing power. In other words, all knowledge, Ishvara is all knowledge. What reveals that all knowledge? Sattva-Guna. That's why we have a flash of insight in reference to the individual. We go, wow, I got an insight, an epiphany. Let me share it with you. We got the projecting power. This is when the individual, at the absence of revealing power, suppose there's an absence of revealing power, starts to project outwards. In other words, it's always focused outwards. Let me go to the next protest. Where's the next protest? Let's look up. Okay, good. Let's go. In other words, always looking for something outside to do, something to participate in. The sense organs have to get involved out there. In other words, it projects from inside to outside, whereas Sattva-Guna turns the mind inwards because it's revealing what is. And we already established this some sessions ago. The entire world is taking place in the mind in reference to the body because all of the images, all of the sounds are being processed by the jnana indriyani, the sense organs, and they're being processed in the brain. And that brain is not apart from the subtle body. And the subtle body is not apart from consciousness. In other words, everything is appearing in you. Now, having said this, last week we have introduced we started out with the definitions of the trigunas in verse 5, and then we went on to topic 2, which was how the three gunas bind. And we did verse 6. So let's chant verse 6 again, and then I will get into the teaching. Tatra sattvam nirmalatvat prakashakam anamayam sukha sangena badnati jnana sangena chanagha.
Arjuna, the sinless one, then among this sattva, because it is pure, is illuminating and is free from affliction. It binds one by connection to subtle form of pleasure and connection to knowledge.
Rajo ragatmakam vidhi trishna sangasamudbhavam tani bhadnati kaunteya karma sangena dehinam.
Arjuna, Rajas, may you know, is in the form of a coloring of the mind, causing longing and well-entrenched attachment. It totally binds the indweller of the body by connection with action.
Tamastva jnana jam vidhi mohanam sarva dehinam pramadalasya nidrabhihi tanibhadnati bharata.
Bharata, Arjuna, Tamas, may you know, is born of ignorance and causes delusion for all those who have bodies. It binds the person completely by indifference, slothfulness, and sleep.
Sattvam sukhe sanjayati rajah karmani bharata jnanam avrityatu tamaha pramade sanjayatyuta.
Bharata, Arjuna, Sattva binds in the form of pleasure and Rajas in the form of action. Tamas, on the other hand, covering knowledge, binds indeed in the form of apathy.
Rajastamascha bhibhuya sattvam bhavati bharata rajah sattvam tamaschaiva tamas sattvam rajastatha.
Bharata, Arjuna, Sattva arises overwhelmingly Rajas and Tamas. Rajas indeed arises overwhelmingly Tamas and Sattva. So too, Tamas arises overwhelmingly Rajas and Sattva.
Verse 6, again, just for revision, said Sattva-Guna is pure, free of pain, and binds via a subtle form of pleasures and knowledge. Now, verse 7, rajaguna causes longing or desire, binds in a form of actions. Raja means dust, so it covers the mind with dust of desire. Initially, little dust is unnoticed and no bother. Therefore, it's allowed to gradually accumulate. Like in your house, it's hard to spot the dust on the carpet. And then we can just kind of say, no, everything's fine. And then 1 year later, you still haven't vacuumed the house. And then dust mites get in, and then, moths start to eat away the carpet. So just like that, desire starts to slowly build up. And it's very hard to catch initially because it doesn't seem like a big deal. It seems very easy to manage. It seems justifiable. Hey, I can enjoy myself. I can have my personal desires. But then as we get involved, maybe sometimes we're bored and we just resort back to that default, give me something to do. So then we go back into that action, and then it slowly starts to build up. It starts to grow up on us. And then eventually we find ourselves with this new activity. And then we say, oh, it's normal. It's how I've always been. No, it's not. You've learned it at some point. Okay, so what are the qualities whereby rajaguna, the projecting power, obviously is going to be projecting. So suppose, for example, someone's late at work. I used this example before, someone that you know, and maybe they're late 20 minutes. And then the mind starts to imagine, right? It starts to fantasize Tamaguna. Because it's concealing knowledge. If you don't have if you don't have the facts, naturally fantasy mode comes in. So the mind starts to imagine what could have happened. Maybe they're being kidnapped. Maybe their car, went up the road. So we start to imagine worst case scenarios, and then we start to always project that. In other words, when they come home, we don't really see the person. We see all of our projections that we've been busy fantasizing. So that's where rajaguna starts to now, project onto them, and it's like they're, surprised because we're not with them. We're not present with the person. We're present with our projections. And we see this all throughout the society, don't we? In the media, whereby, they will say, for example, the COVID vaccines are the mind control substances, and they're just there to control the people. In other words, the person sits at home, doesn't really engage with real scientists, real biologists, real chemists. know nothing about DNA research, just general assumption. Here's what I'm suspicious of my own self, therefore I project that onto the humanity. I'm suspicious of humanity, and therefore now project onto the government. They're trying to control us. We want freedom. Someone's taking away our freedom. No, this freedom's not a way out there. Freedom's completely within us, within our own home, within our own environment. It's not got nothing to do out there. But projecting power owing to the lack of Sattva-Guna, therefore it doesn't have the facts. It naturally then takes its conditionalities and it projects it outwards. It's the government, it's the prime minister, it's the president, it's the virus, it's just blaming mode. So the hallmarks of rajaguna, besides projecting, which is a huge major one, are acquisition and experience. In other words, rajaguna is not concerned with acquiring knowledge. It is concerned with acquiring experiences or going through experiences that satisfy its desires. That's why rajaguna wants to go out there, collect experiences. Let's go. Give me something more. Right? Let's kind of, let's increase our list of what we have gone through in this life, called the bucket list. There was a bucket list some years ago whereby the individual tries to do as many things as possible. This is, and you get to know them. I knew one of them. They are really energized. They're really charming. There's a great attraction about them. So it's a lot of passion, like outwards moving energy. And it can be really attractive. But at the expense of, if you look at the inner mind underneath, it is agitated. I'm not saying now it's completely, but there's an aspect of agitation because why? The person, as I said earlier at the beginning, you are as you are. You can't do anything about the fact that I am. But owning to the fact that my ignorance says, in order to fulfill myself, I need to temporarily subside this mind. It's moving like that. It's constantly moving. So how do I stop this mind? How do I stop this moving mind so that I can have a little bit of Sattva-Guna, the guna of feeling good, as I said last week, so you can finally shine on the subtle body by doing an action. Every time you do an action, you temporarily stop the mind. And then what happens? What ensues? Sattva-Guna, the joy of self in a form of manifest. Of course, it's not the original joy, but it's in the form of the Sattva-Guna joy. So in other words, acquisition. I need to acquire experiences so that I may fulfill my desires, because every time I fulfill my desires, speaking as a Raja dominant ahamkara, it temporarily stops the mind. And when it does, it feels good and then we're relieved. And then the mind starts to shake up again. Why? Because last week I explained the samskaras just keep on pouring down. So it really never just stops. The other hallmark of Rajaguna is attachment. So once we've acquired and we've gone through an experience, we get attached because we recognize it brought us some goodness, some feeling of peace, some sense of resolution. So we say, so we make a conclusion, we say, so it was this action that has brought this peace. No, what brought the peace? The mind has been stilled temporarily. It doesn't matter what the action is. If you were to put an order to it, it will be like this. It starts out like this. I am ignorant. Since when? Since beginningless beginning. In other words, I do not know that the nature of myself is fullness. I do not feel that fullness, if you want to call it a feeling. In fact, it is a feeling in the form of the manifest subtle body. It does not express why. Because owing to ignorance, what kind of ignorance? The one that says that in order to be happy, I need to acquire. Why do I make that conclusion? Because when I acquire, it temporarily stops the mind. Then what? The mind having been stopped temporarily, Sattva-Guna finally gets to shine on this mind. Then I feel good and I make that conclusion, I make that error. Action equals feeling good. Therefore, go and get action, go and make more money, going out into the world and make it big. In other words, owing to the ignorance of the fact that I am whole and complete right now, owing to that ignorance, there is no choice but to then pursue things that bring temporary sense of joy, because who wants to live unhappy? Nobody. So the person does something in a form of action if there is a Raja Guna dominant samskara. We said also if there is a Sattva-Guna dominant samskara, it's going to bind the person in a form of knowledge. Give me a book. Let's go to the library. Let me read more reports. Let me read more. Let me work with more data. And it's really attracted to this because the person gets temporarily enmeshed. They kind of fade, the world kind of fades out. You know, during the pandemic, we've been indoors and you think, well, that's kind of Sattva-Guna, you know, it's not being externalized. No. What is the form of socializing today? Well, for the kids, it's computer games. You go online, multiplayer with other humans, highly addictive. Still, the mind goes out there. Facebook, social media, YouTube. It doesn't matter what time we're living in. Technology hasn't actually done anything. It hasn't caused our mind to be still. It hasn't caused our mind to be more at peace with ourselves, despite all of the knowledge. Because despite the knowledge, if a person is rajaguna or tamaguna dominant, they're not going to be searching on Google how to be more peaceful. They're going to be searching on Google what? Computer games, activity, right? Something to participate, something to externalize my mind. So the times that we go through do absolutely nothing to the disposition of the person's triguna composition. That's why we say, end of the day, you have to come to a point and say, stop. I choose to say no to those things that seem easy and attractive. And I choose to say yes to those things that are hard, but bring long-term pleasant results and are meaningful in life. Therefore, the person has to take that willpower, has to say no. Furthermore, rajaguna tends to hold on to things because, as I said, it has associated peacefulness or tranquility to that which is acquired. So naturally, the conclusion is I need to now retain what I've acquired in order to retain my peace, because now my peace is bound to the object. So then the person ends up acquiring and holding on to things. My mom still has newspapers from 20 years ago and tapes of Diana's death. She hasn't watched it once. Very interesting. So we all know people from our personal, intimate lives who are, you know, one way or the other subject to these trigunas. Now, also, I want you to take note, please, while listening, do not now go, okay, who can I now think and who's doing these gunas? I want you to immediately follow that up with, where am I also possibly demonstrating these qualities? In other words, see, even now while listening to this, suppose the mind is rajaguna and it's listening to the guna teaching. What's the rajaguna dominant mind going to do? It's going to use examples. So here's, okay, so Donald Trump, yep, he's definitely one of those, yep. So my brother, my sister, my husband, my wife, okay, so in other words, even listening to this, you're susceptible to these trigunas. If the mind is Sattva-Guna dominant, then it may use an example because it's much easier to use for a teaching sake, to use some external example, but you immediately need to follow that up and say, so here's where I'm exhibiting these attributes. So you follow these up together immediately. One, for the sake of helping you understand how the world works. And second, for the help of understanding this mind, so that one may be at peace with this mind. Because as long as this mind remains unknown, not understood, that which is not understood about the person keeps on showing up in a form of thoughts, in a form of vrittis, in a form of irritations. So we need to understand this mind so that we no longer need to keep on pondering what is it that makes this person tick. Because as long as the person is thinking what makes this person tick, what is the person identified with? Ahamkara, the door, karta bhokta. How does rajaguna bind? In a form of attachment to actions. In one short summary, so doing, a lot of very active person in life, at home. Furthermore, because the person is constantly doing, this is the only guna that reassures or guarantees rebirth on earth. Because earth, the bhuloka, out of the 14 lokas according to the Vedic model, is a very special place actually. It's somewhere in the middle. In fact, it is in the middle. And it is the one place where the person is capable of generating punya papa, sins and virtues, according to their actions. And when a person does actions, then they generate a lot of results, right? Palam, that have to be then addressed furthermore, have to be addressed again. So, and for that, you need to be reborn on that same place, on the same compatible loka, so that I can continue exhausting those actions, those results, and I can continue enjoying them. So suppose you take a politician and they're doing a fine job. Obviously, they're running the country, and they die. What is a politician for the most part? Kshatriya. We spoke last week. Kshatriyas are those who are noble. They're generally noble. They're thinking for the greater whole. They may make some mistakes, as everyone does, owing to a Tamaguna. However, being active, being engaged, wanting to participate with the society back on earth. So it is one that reassures birth. This is why, by the way, and the Vedas are brilliant at this. They say, having gone through grihasta, your householder, you need to start rethinking your life, vanaprastha. That means you need to say, what are my priorities? Am I doing too many actions in my life? And are they really necessary? And for whom am I doing it for? And then you need to reprioritize your life slowly, so that less actions are present. Eventually, you go to the stage of sannyasa. Now, nowadays, it doesn't really mean leaving the house, leaving your spouse, or leaving anything. It just means deliberately creating a protective environment that allows you to think, allows you to devote, allows you to contemplate, allows you to self-inquire, a close relationship to you and divinity. Why? So that the mind can drop this need to kind of clean the house at 80, right? You're 70 years old, 80 years old, you still clean the house. And you really get caught up in this, right? Because we think, oh, it's okay. When I'm 80, 70, my kids are going to take care of me and I'm not going to do anything. It's not like that. We get caught up. We always have something to do. So the person has to start dropping these activities so they can start to devote more to the Lord. And this comes especially important at the end of one's life. For the rest of us who are 30 onwards, we don't have to worry so much about this because naturally your prarabdha karma while you're young is quite strong and it's going to cause the person to do things, right? We can't help it. In fact, in neuroscience, it also says that as the person grows older, by the time you hit 30 onwards, the totality of yourself has already been established. By the time you're 30, maybe 30 or 35 plus minus. In other words, even up to 20, right? The person's still discovering who they are, where do they belong, what do they need to do, where is my place in this world? By the time you hit 30 onwards, that is basically you as a relative person for the rest of your life, which also correlates to the fact that by the time the person's 30 plus minus, the samskaras that were queued up to be played out, as I discussed last week, most of them have already played out. Now it's just basically a repetition of that which you've already done before. So the person at their 30 onwards starts to really just be like that for the most of their life. So it's not like you're going to now change, 40, 50, 60, unless you put hard work into it. But the person that you are now, especially if you're after 30, that is basically the way that you will be for the rest of your life. So again, it's not really about changing one's personality, but being okay with it. What's wrong with it? Because as I said, you're just an instrument of the Lord. So end of the day, it comes down to acceptance. Am I completely okay? Do I understand completely that this is just an instrument, incidental product of the Lord, through which these actions, according to the needs of the whole, can be expressed for the betterment of the society, for the betterment of the environment that you find yourself within. All the while, there is a knowledge in the background that all of this is not self. And it's not like you're saying that. This is important. It's not like you're saying I'm not self, because that still preserves the ahamkara. As long as there's a person doing the sadhana, as long as there's a subtle body doing the reminding, all of this is appearing in me, right? I'm consciousness, it's appearing in me. That's still a doer. Initially, yes, that may be required, but eventually the person needs to let go of this need to, quote, remind oneself. You don't need to remind yourself that you are. I am. That's the end of the story. So Ramana Maharishi beautifully says this, because many people came up to him and they said, should I meditate? And he says, why do you need to meditate, right? Why do you need to just recognize the meditator? When are you not meditating on the self? When are you not yourself? When do you not exist? So what is this need to meditate, to close one's eyes and try to contact something? You are never not yourself. That is a fact. And therefore, one simply owns up to this simple truth. Now, you can only do that, how? Once you understand the nature of these trigunas. If we give the person this teaching before the teaching of Prakriti or these trigunas, then the rejection of thoughts, rejection of emotions, what is that called? That's called denial. And this is how most schools will go about. This is called Neo-Vedanta. They will say, reject the thought, because it's just mithya, right? It's just prakriti. Reject the emotion. It's just mithya. See, there is a truth in that, but that only comes after you understand what is the value in these thoughts, because they just keep on coming. When you're just there at home and then just thought comes out of nowhere. When you stop giving value to these thoughts, where does the mind naturally go back to? I am, self. In other words, as long as we keep on entertaining, as long as I, Brahman, keeps on identifying with the thoughts that keep on popping up, guess what happens? More thoughts keep on popping up. So this is something that you can do in your own self-inquiring, in your own practice. Notice this. At home, or who's ever around you, notice how thoughts come. I want you to notice the relationship that you have to those thoughts. Do you, A, make a story out of it? That means you continue the thread of that story, of that initial thought. Or B, you understand this is a thought. It's not even mine. It is appearing in my awareness. And then you go back to that pure existence, that pure I am. Not modification of I am, because that's still a thought, but that sense of I exist, I am. That is a practice. That is called self-inquiry. So yes, after some time, the person has to start saying, what is the value of these thoughts? And that's what Ramana Maharishi beautifully says, rejecting thoughts, because there's no value in them. As I said, if you are surrendered to God completely, when you need to act, you will act. Every other time in between, that is your chance for self-inquiry. If you need to attend to your son, to your daughter, to your work, that's when you take on the role temporarily of the worker, of the mom, of the dad, of the boyfriend, girlfriend, etc. When that role is over, whatever thoughts come, I can promise you this, they have no value whatsoever. And that is the time for self-inquiry. Okay, this is a thought, reject, because it is prakriti, it is not I. And then go back to that natural beingness, I am. Okay, verse 8. Tamaguna is reinforced by absence of relative knowledge, in other words, ignorance. And this cultivates additional delusions, that is, falsehoods and facts are mixed up. Okay, so truths and facts are mixed up. And this sustains ignorance. In other words, Tamaguna is that energy that envelops the subtle body and it simply covers it from knowing anything. In fact, the greatest example of this is deep sleep, where it's almost like darkness just envelops the mind, morphine, and it puts you to sleep. And without that morphine, without that Tamaguna, can't sleep because the mind's active. It's still pondering over the samskaras. These samskaras make the mind active. So something needs to cover this mind completely. So this intellect is not known to the self. That's why in deep sleep, you do not know anything about your life in the subtle body, because Tamaguna has completely shielded the subtle body from the self. Okay, now what are the qualities of Tama dominance? So when Tamaguna is dominant, what's the experience like? The first is the person is indifferent to their surroundings. And this causes carelessness, a sense of negligence. They make mistakes, goofing, stuffing things up, being a goofball, I guess they call it. Not in a humorous way, but it kind of like clumsiness. And they don't intend to, but just making unintentional mistakes. And why? Because the buddhi is suppressed. The capacity to evaluate what needs to be done properly, it is partially suppressed, not completely, because it's never completely suppressed, but it is relatively suppressed to the point where the thinking instrument is not fully available to see what needs to be done and when. And because the dharma is also shining on the intellect, what's also suppressed? Dharma, because the intellect is suppressed. So Tamaguna causes suppression of the intellect, and it also causes suppression of dharma. One of the most psychopaths, for example, we look at the psychology of them. We can look at them from many different angles, but ultimately, what is a psychopath? Tamaguna dominant, followed by rajaguna, and Sattva-Guna is last. In other words, there's no backup. to evaluate what is going on, because the intellect is completely covered up, and Tamaguna covers up the dharma. Therefore, there's no sense of right or wrong. I'm allowed to hurt. I'm allowed to do despicable things that are, beyond our descriptions, and I don't feel anything. Not numbed down. Why? Because there's no capacity to think about what is being done. In fact, I heard just some days ago an unfortunate story in Afghanistan. A well-known psychiatrist who helps 120 patients a day from post-traumatic stress as a result of wars that have taken place in the last 20 years. He was a very well-known psychiatrist, and he was kidnapped by some group, and they demanded money from the daughter. And so daughter didn't know where to get $350,000 US. Now that's even a lot for us, never mind someone in Afghanistan. They sold their house, they asked their friends, they paid for the ransom for the person to be released, and they still delivered the body dead. To take someone's money, to take someone's life, and the body was tortured. Tamaguna. Complete coverage of intellect, unable to feel another person's pain, unable to feel another person's life, totally covered up, no value for human life. That is Tamaguna maximum in dominance. Tamaguna also causes laziness. So any kind of procrastination, that means actions are hard to do, they're not fun to do, there's no excitement in doing things. It's heavy. The person feels heavy. They just don't want to move. They don't want to take action. Sloppiness, lethargy. These are all qualities of Tamaguna dominance. It also causes mistakes in our reports, in our speech, in our thinking, in our calculations, in our evaluations, and we end up misjudging the environment because we do not have the fullness of the intellect. Therefore, what happens is the closest approximate is taken to be a fact, and it's not being evaluated. The person doesn't say, well, could this be the case? Could there be something more? In other words, there's no sense of expanding one's view, because whatever comes, it's taken. I'm good enough with that, and I'll take that. It is required for sleep. Sleep itself is not problematic, but where Tamaguna is the biggest stealer of time and productivity is it causes excessive sleep. So the person wants to take sleep during the day. Like, why? Days like rajaguna, energy, and yet the person still is able to take sleep. So it causes the person to oversleep sometimes. They know they need to get up early and get their work done, and they've already decided this last week or yesterday, but still when the person wakes up, it's like put the snooze alarm, right? So whatever does that snooze, that's Tamaguna talking. It wants to remain dark. It wants to remain in a little slumberness. It veils our emotions. It veils our thinking. It veils what needs to be done. So our to-dos keep on being larger and larger. It also causes herd mentality. Suppose that something happens in the environment, and then you see people like, okay, what are others doing? Like, you notice that? Like, what are others doing before I act? Okay, someone's getting attacked. Are others helping? Okay, they're not helping. I shouldn't help also. Because the intellect is covered, it cannot think for itself. It then resorts onto what is the next closest person doing. Laziness, carelessness, vagueness, lack of concern, mistakes, lethargy, too much sleep. All of these are qualities of Tamaguna.
Can I just ask something? Because you said earlier about morphine.
Yeah, metaphorical morphine.
Yeah. But in a sense, it does dull your senses.
Absolutely.
It sort of covers your senses, and we use it quite often for people at end of life care, like with palliative care. If you're someone that is into self-inquiry and you've spent so many years sort of trying to still the mind and clear your mind so that you can get to that point where at the end of life you want to think clearly about all these things, and then you're given morphine, wouldn't that just dull you into a point where you can't discern anything, you can't discriminate anything anymore at that very moment where you need to be, I think,
good point.
You need to be clear about things.
Yeah, sure.
I often think when people are given they're given a butterfly at the end of their life when they've got a lot of pain, So they're given morphine and midazolam and all these other drugs that sort of dull the senses. They dull their intellect. They dull their intellect. Yeah.
You know, I mean, hopefully at the end of one's life, one shouldn't be going to full self-inquiry. That should have already been done before. So at the end of the life, if one has already done their self-inquiry and they're now in pain, cancer growth or some pain that's happening, then receiving morphine is actually not going to affect their afterlife. It's not going to affect their sense of thinking, because they're still thinking there enough so that they are, and also they've been thinking one particular way for a long time. So it's in the background, right? It's in the mind. The physical body may not be available because it's under morphine, but the mind, which is fully sharp, is being trained to recognize or discern self from not self. And thus, it doesn't really affect the person's afterlife as a result of morphine intake, assuming they have done their spiritual work before.
Okay, if it's already established, then it won't really impact the buddhi in that sense, as far as, yeah. I often wondered that, because, you know, I see a lot of patients that do get given all these drugs and they can't really communicate or anything properly anymore.
Even if the person had 1 month of contemplation of God before his death, that would have already changed the course for the next lifetime. You know, because when a person is already at that stage of not able to think or under morphine, it's too late. They're thinking about their kids. They're thinking about whatever makes them comfortable in that moment. Because the path of least resistance, right? Give me something that's just going to comfort me in this vulnerable moment.
I have one patient who he was quite religious. He was Christian. He was quite religious. And I was just pointing to the pictures of his wife. And this is like the day before he died. And I said to him, oh, she looks very familiar, you know, because she looked like somebody else that I'd seen. So I said to him, she looks very familiar. And he said, well, we've all had different faces before. He said that we've all had many faces before. That's what he said. And I went, okay, yes, okay. I didn't really want to push any beliefs or any ideas on him, because everyone's entitled to their own way of thinking. But he did say that, and I was quite surprised by that.
Flash of insight.
So I didn't expect it to come from his mouth, but he said it.
Indeed. Yeah, and sometimes a person at the end of their life will have, they will give up. They will say, okay, now it's time to release, right? Some of them really just own up and say, I'm ready to go. And that aloneness, that sense of giving up one's responsibilities and the fact how much money I have, what I've done, and all of this, that alone is enough to induce a flash of Sattva-Guna, provides a sense of clarity. And thus the person is able to make these revelations like, wow, I never thought about this. Suddenly in these last moments, God has come into my life, because they've been holding on to objects in their mind. You know, this is all rajaguna, holding on to things. Let go, and then suddenly you're able to think clearly, because the nature of the subtle body is Sattva-Guna. But we induce it with rajaguna and Tamaguna. How? Through our repetitive thoughts. Yeah. So if you leave this mind alone, naturally what ensues is this pure reflective mirror of consciousness.
A desire for truth, where will it fall? Is it in Sattva or Rajas?
Desire for divinity, desire for something higher than this gross body has to be Sattva-Guna. Because see, desire for like senses, let's appease the senses. And the sense is nothing but, you know, the body, the physical body is Tamaguna. To think something subtler than this gross instrument, you have to have something subtler than the Tamaguna. You have to have Sattva-Guna. So Sattva-Guna causes us to have those moments of connection, have those moments of unity, of just that innocent joy for being connected and for being part of this existence, right? So see, suppose that you get this knowledge, right? And Sattva-Guna is lacking. Now it's going to sound like, yeah, I understood. It makes sense. But the actual, do you experience it? Is there an experience in the body, right? Is it there? Is it like strong? And do you feel that innocent joy of just pure existence? That is owing to Sattva-Guna. So there is a level of sadhana that has to take place to purify, to stop this mind from constantly giving output of thoughts. And also you have to stop eventually identifying with constant thoughts of what happened yesterday, of conversations that I've had yesterday, of what I should do tomorrow. Stop living in the past and the future. As long as that's there, then the joy of being, the joy and connectedness with the Lord, that is going to be absent. It's going to be like a dry knowledge. I came to Vedanta, I got this knowledge, it was all dry. Well, it's not my fault. It's why? Because the sadhana was missing. The sadhana required to purify the mind so that it can hold this reflective mirror called Sattva-Guna, and thus keep on reflecting your inherent joy in a form of manifestation. It is mithya, but it's still joy nevertheless. Yeah. So if you're asking, where is that joy in life? Where is it gone? Well, it's not gone anywhere. It's always shining on your mind right now. But what's denying it is these samskaras that keep on pouring. Now, the question is, what causes samskaras to keep on pouring? Well, my identification with the thought that comes out, right? So thought comes, I go, okay, so I self-identifies with a thought, and then I extend and I make a story out of it. And therefore, there's a demand for that thought to come again. Because I just said, since I got involved, it's important enough that it needs to come back. So that's why I say, eventually, one person has to start rejecting these thoughts politely, gently. This is not called denial, but in the light of knowledge, understand this fellow has no thought. It is just mithya. This thought has no value. It's just mithya. It's just prakriti. It keeps on pouring endlessly, and it's not mine. So that means taking a firm stand in your truth, a firm stand, an assertive stand. Not, oh yeah, one day, it's going to happen. Like firm. Verse 9, summary of how each guna binds the individual. So sattva binds in the form of pleasures, rajas in the form of action, Tamaguna in the form of apathy. Apathy just means lack of concern. It means passivity and unwillingness to take part. So I've covered topic 1 so far. Topic 1 was definition of the trigunas. Just a quick summary. Sattva-Guna, mind-oriented, ahamkara, is highly attracted to the pursuit of knowledge. Just like Gokul is now looking at a book, that's Sattva-Guna talking. Rajaguna, mind-oriented, ahamkara, is highly attracted to action, is always going to be looking for what to do and when to do it and how much can he do more. And Tamaguna, this is where the mind is in delusion, because again, it's the intellect's covering, so the capacity to assess is not there. And furthermore, the karma indriyani, the organs of action, but also the organs of knowledge, they're both underutilized in Tamaguna, ahamkara, dominant personality, because the person is not, willing to perceive or look at many things or learn. So that's underutilized, but also they're not willing to do many things. So this is also underutilized. So both of these are underutilized. In Rajaguna, this is overutilized, and Sattva-Guna, this is overutilized. So we need to strike a balance. Now, topic 2 that we just covered, verse 9 summarizes topic 2. This is whereby how each guna binds. And this is verse 6 to 9. We're now on verse 9. Sattva-Guna binds in a form of tranquility. So, we want, tranquil moments. We want it to be silent. One dog bark, we write a complaint letter. Leaf blower, complaint letter. Phone, complaints. So, we try to kind of control the environment. It has to be according to that which suits my addiction for knowledge, my addiction for learning. Also, it binds in a form of acquisition of information. Because Sattva-Guna is that which reveals. That which reveals what? Knowledge. So being bound by Sattva-Guna, the person is always invested of uncovering more knowledge about things. It also binds the person in a form of subtle pleasures. And what kind of subtle pleasures? They are mostly found in spirituality. We've got clairvoyance, or we've got angels, or communicating with dead ancestors. We've got channeling. We've got wisdom, just being really attracted to different kinds of wisdom. So this is being bound by Sattva-Guna. Rajaguna being bound by results in Rajaguna, first of all, rejects information because it is not interested in facts. It is interested in actions. It is interested in something to do. Therefore, it is bound by the need to act. For whom? The self, yourself, the society, your family, even the guru, the rituals, Ishvara. That's why we prescribe these rituals for someone that's still starting out in spirituality, because we know they want to do things. So here's a japa, here's a mantra, here's a particular spiritual practice, because you need it to reduce this rajaguna. And tamaguna is person is bound by negligence. In other words, they have a sense of there's a carelessness or making mistakes and vagueness. In other words, someone's speaking and you ask them a question and they give you a really vague answer. Specifics versus vagueness, sattva versus tamaguna. Of course, now I want to give a little note here. This is not black or white. It's not like if the person gives a vague answer, that is tamaguna. This is not like computer language. I'm just giving you these overemphasizing the qualities. Now you need to bring this together and see how the world is made up of different colors of these trigunas, a mixture of these trigunas, and they play out in small things and in big things also. Okay, topic 3. This is indicatory signs, in other words, signs that indicate which guna is dominant right now. And this will be in verse 10 to 13. So verse 10, what is the effect of each guna overwhelming the other two? So what happens when one of these gunas overwhelm the other two, right? Or any one of the combinations. So what do we know so far? We know that Prakriti is made up of trigunas, and everything is made up of Prakriti. So in other words, whatever is an effect of the cause, that effect is going to be endowed with a combination of these trigunas at the time of dissolution, when the universe comes back into singularity. These gunas remain in an equilibrious state. In other words, Sattva-Guna is dominant, and they're all in an equilibrious state. Now, when these two gunas start to come, rajas and projecting and concealing power, that's when the equation gets shaken up, and then the universe projects. In fact, just to give you an example, you're wondering how to imagine this. What wakes you up? Do you wake yourself up? In other words, deep slumber, deep sleep. And then what takes place right before the person comes into consciousness, comes into that waking, rajaguna. In other words, everything was in one big equilibrium. And then suddenly rajaguna starts to come more and more and more and more and more. And eventually, boom, instantly the world appears. You wake up like that. When these three gunas are in potential and they're in equilibrious state, when these two, the rajas and tamas, start to come, they start to dominate the sattva-guna, then in the background, it's brewing, and then the entire universe gets projected, what we're now experiencing. Just like when you wake up, it's the same comparison. On a microcosm, macrocosm. Everything is made out of the three gunas. For example, take inert objects, like a rock or a stone, or periodic table of elements. All of them have trigunas, yes? But what is dominant? Tamaguna. Let's take plant kingdom. All of them have trigunas, yes? But what's more than inert objects? Sattva-Guna and Rajaguna. That means there's greater Sattva-Guna and Rajaguna than inert object. That's the only difference between an inert object and the plant kingdom. That means there's more Sattva and Rajas. That's why plants can move. Rajaguna is that which moves, that which animates. Whereas a rock is very solid, it doesn't move. Right? It's still there, it's still consciousness, but it just doesn't have the power to think. It doesn't have the power to do anything. Therefore, it is dominantly Tamaguna. Plant kingdom, as I said, more Sattva and Rajas than rocks. What about animal kingdom? Again, three gunas are there, but what is even greater than the former two, Sattva and Rajas? In other words, animals have even more Sattva and Rajas than plants. Plants have more Rajas and Tamas and Sattva and Rajas than inert objects. And then we go on to human beings. Human beings also are made up of these three gunas. However, Sattva and Rajas is greater than that of the animals. That's the only difference that distinguishes us between these two. In fact, we have more Sattva-Guna, which we're able to think. Now, human beings, according to the scriptures, are further divided into 4 categories to help you understand these guna dominance. The first is stone beings. This is whereby the equation for the sattva, rajas, and tamas goes like this: TRS, right? So stone beings, heavy. There's no knowledge backing anything up, so it's TRS, so it's reversed. And as I said last week, these are the kids in high school, you know, the slow, lethargic ones that get stoned. Now, this is how this teaching can be useful. No longer need to go, oh, you know, they're getting stoned. What, you know, bunch of fools. You don't have to do that anymore. You can understand, so this is guna dominance. That's why I say earlier on, this model is really useful to help you understand the world instead of having to judge the world according to our lack of knowledge of how the world works. Then you have plant beings, what the scriptures call the plant beings. Now, if you think about plants, they're generally survival of the fittest. All plants really care about is, I want to survive. Give me water. They still have a little bit of thinking, but it's generally rudimentary, right? Basic thinking. Here's the sun, and for the sake of my survival, water, that is good enough. Emotions, you can say plants have emotions, but it's very basic, very rudimentary. So we also have what we call plant beings. In other words, there's short-term ambitions for such a being, because all I need is my little house, my little, you know, side income, and that's all I need. I don't need to think about you. I don't need to think about anyone, just my little circle. Then we have what's called animal beings. This is where the combination changes into RTS. So animal beings are RTS. Sattva-Guna is still last, but rajaguna is first. Now, what the scriptures say is majority of the world is animal beings. They do not even say human beings. I'll tell you why now. Now, think about animal beings. What can animals do that plants cannot? They can still discern how to live, but it's a lot more sophisticated, right? They're thinking to emote. They still have this sense of, they have this capacity of family, of union, like lions, you know, like a lion pride. And they all understand each other. They understand the difference between a friend and a foe. So like an animal, a human being, what's the only difference between a human and, quote, a human and an animal? A human only has a much larger, a much more sophisticated intellect. Otherwise, there's actually no difference between a human being and an animal, other than a much more sophisticated capacity to emote and to discern what needs to be done. The hamkara is still the same between a human being and an animal, because, you know, you go up to a bird and the bird runs away. In other words, don't hurt me, don't hurt the individual me, just like a human being. The next category is spiritual beings, not human beings, according to the Shastra, because in the Shastra, we call a human being manushya, which means a thinking being, but thinking according to what? According to mithya, the same order of reality that animals are capable of ascertaining? No, according to the total reality. In other words, you cannot exclude one half and then call yourself better than the beings that also only recognize the other half, which is mithya. You have to understand something much bigger to put yourself out of the category of these former 3, the animals, the plants, and the stones. And only a human being only a thinking being is capable of doing that. Therefore, spiritual being is that one who's able to think in light of the scriptures, not in light of mithya topics, light of language learning, light of science, politics, mathematics, geometry, and you just keep on, like, you know, and innovations. All of that is order of mithya. So spiritual being is SRT. So this is the order, SRT. And they have to think in the light of the scriptures to be called a manushya. So you can really see how strict this really is, you know, how the rishis have thought this out. Because we usually say, oh, human being, but on the basis of what? On the basis of they have 2 arms, legs, and they're capable of kind of driving a car. You give an intellect to an animal, to a monkey. Suppose, you know, you train a monkey, they're probably going to be able to do the same thing. So a spiritual being is that one who thinks according to the scriptures. because it is actually a crime not to know the Lord while being in a human body. Because specifically, you have to ask, why is the human body specifically given according to the scriptures? Why is the mortal body given? So I can recognize I'm much bigger than this mortal body. If I do not recognize this, where is the difference between me and an animal? Because I, as a human being, identify as a flesh, as a mind, but an animal also identifies with the flesh and the mind. Where's the difference? Can these guna compositions be changed? And the answer is yes. However, it depends on the person's effort, and it depends on how much time they're willing to put into it. And also, if the answer was no, then what's the point of the scriptures? Because the whole, the entire Vedic, karma kanda of the Vedas, or any kind of spiritual field, you've got sadhanas. In other words, the existence of these sadhanas, of these practices, presupposes the fact that I, as an individual, have a certain level of control to increase the composition of SRT, the most appropriate composition. In the Vedas, for example, they prescribe japa, they prescribe mantra, they prescribe puja, they prescribe karma yoga. All of these things are for the sake of helping the person rise and have this rise to the spiritual being, get out of the animal being into the spiritual being. Once the person is selfishly active, then what do? They change their nature of their actions. So in other words, this is like the scriptures. This is what they say. Karma yoga level 1. Be selfishly active. No problem. We don't mind what you do, because your samskaras are going to keep on telling you what to do anyway. So go into the real world, make money, right? But then as the person starts to gain more experiences, and you can see why experience is so important before the person starts to get into Vedanta, then you can start to change the nature of your actions. And in the scriptures, this will be equivalent to sakama bhakti into nishkama bhakti. I discussed this some time ago. Sakama bhakti, in other words, desire for the world, sakama, with kama, with desire. Therefore, desire for this, desire for that, absolutely normal. Brahmacharya, grahasta, you can say sakama. And then you go into nishkama. Nishkama means without desire. Now, obviously, without desire, you have to have desire for something else, because you can't be desireless. So nishkama for worldly attainments, but with desire for something higher, something that which is behind the world, that which holds the world together, the glue of the world, dharma and moksha. We also have in the Vedas, in respect to can we modify these gunas, what's called the 4x4 model. And just to give you one simple English understanding what it means. We first start out as an inactive individual, like teenagers. Not all of them, but it depends on where they're coming from. Inactive, right? Lazy. Just give it to me easy. Don't request too much. And then we go into selfish. That's much better now. Inactive into selfish. And this is the proper order. This is how the scriptures recommend. In other words, go and experience the world, son, daughter. Go and enjoy, but you give them a little bit of some rules to obviously abide by, because they don't want to get into trouble, and then it's on to you as a parent. Go into the world and experience. Once you've done that, what happens? You can start to make wiser decisions, because you know what brings hurt, and you also know what brings joy. And that's what we call noble actions. That means now it's holistic. Now it's about community. It's about bringing others into the picture. And once I've done that, once I've met intelligent beings, once I've talked and once I've discovered, then I go into self-inquiry. Now I think about everything that has happened. I think about what I've done wrong, what I've done right, and how the cause-effect relationship is played out. Inactivity, selfish, noble, self-inquiry, which also follows the 4x4 model, brahmacharya. We start out learning in school. After we have learned and we have received, and we can even be arrogant, like Shvetaketu and Udalaka, the son was a little bit arrogant, and the father says, has your teacher told you that knowledge, which is, the nature of Brahman? No, it hasn't, how can this knowledge exist? So there was a little bit of arrogance there on Shvetaketu's part. It doesn't matter, because now there's education. Now you go into into grahasta, right? Now you can say, oh, I want a wife, I want a husband, I want kids. Let's build a community of my own. Let the child be so sensitive to reveal all of my, shortcomings. You know how children are, right? So sensitive to everything. Nothing goes unnoticed. And you're like, wow, didn't know I could hide this much. Yeah, this is like children. It's beautiful. It's a lovely experience for children to reveal all of your shortcomings and your blind spots. And there's just no hiding with them. They just say it how it is. No filters. Of course, later on when we grow up, then we develop filters, what is appropriate, inappropriate. And that further on causes sometimes, holding back, giving the silent treatment and so on. Then we have the 4x4 model of Shudra, the person that's lazy. Just give me something to do. Give me the instructions, how to do it exactly. Give me a template that I can follow and I'll get the job done. I can get the money and, do whatever I want with it. And then we have the Vaishya. Vaishya is selfishly active, right? So from lazy into selfishly active. So now he's a trader, like makes money and is out there making results and trading and exchanging goods and making it big and being really successful. And it is for themselves, it is for their little community. But then later on, they start to wisen up. They go into someone that's more noble, like, hey, this is not working. It's not making me happy, even though I'm cheating. It's not really making me happy. It's making me feel guilty. And a person learns through this. So you can really start to see it's not really about going, oh, you're cheating, bad person. This whole system is set up by this vast grand order. In fact, the person needs to cheat in the field in order to learn not to cheat. That's what Bhuloka is, the earth, a place where you have many souls, billions of souls coming to discover their wisdom. And so we are sharing all of this on this one planet called Earth. So we have to understand where others are coming. And this model helps us to do so. So we go from Shudra, Vaishya, and then we become noble, the Kshatriya. The Kshatriya are the protectors of this world. They're the ones like the United Nations. That's basically one big nation of Kshatriyas, right? Let's hold peace talks. Let's standardize the system so that we can provide resources for countries that require, in troubling times. So the police force, the politicians, again, I said it's not black or white. Now, don't think, okay, Shudra, politician equals noble. There's always that mixture between these gunas playing there. And then we have finally the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas are the thinkers of the society, the educators, the philosophers, those who set the rules, like the Supreme Court of Australia, or Supreme Court in the United States, the one that makes the final decision. That is, you could say the Brahmanas. You can say the ones that think what needs to be, let's ascertain what's the highest, most effective and efficient way for the entire country. And let's impose that new sanction. Let's impose that new rule, that new declaration. And then we have the 4x4. We've got Kama. First desire, let's satisfy myself, it's Tama and Raja mixture. And then we've got Artha. Now you have to think a little bit more. You need to trade with other people. You need more intelligence there. You need more empathy. And then you got Dharma. Dharma needs a lot of Sattva-Guna, because again, you need to include the whole environment to think for others and think for yourself. How is my action making a difference on the larger good? Now, you may think this is such a simple teaching, but I can tell you, most society does not think like this. The society does not, on the most part, does not think, oh, okay, so, I'm driving a loud car with a loud exhaust system. I'm probably annoying those houses around me, so I should probably take it off and not annoy them. My leaf blower is probably loud, and I should probably, blow less. People don't generally think like that. It is still self-centered. It's my house. I want to clean the leaves. That's it. That's where the thinking stops. So again, I want to show you, not to judge, but to see how this guna dominance creates vast personalities of people. And then finally, after dharma, we've got moksha, which requires the most sophisticated intellect, the most willpower, the most greatest amount of discipline. So let's close this verse 10. If you look at this 4x4 model, we can conclude one very important teaching. Before you go into Brahmana, or thinking, or self-inquiry, or thinking, or contemplating, or seeing your relationship to the whole, seeing how you are the whole, if a person goes into that without first contributing to the society, then all of the efforts of sadhana will fail, because every being, as I said earlier, is an instrument of the Lord. There is not one person that is born out of no reason at all. The vast grand order has a plan for every single individual. This is called swadharma. If the person doesn't exhaust their swadharma in the society, if he or she doesn't contribute in the society, then no amount of skipping, going, what's the point? It's all mithya, it's all prakriti, it's all gunas. Let me go straight into the spiritual teaching. That is not going to work, because in the background is going to be guilt of not having done what I inherently know should have been done, because there's a certain skill that's singing in the person's soul, and yet they're unable to follow it. They don't have the courage to follow it. So what Krishna is really saying is, one needs to absolutely go through this swadharma in order to come naturally to this teaching where it makes sense. That's the only difference between those who come and those who also come, and then two groups. One succeed, one doesn't. You ask those who have not succeeded, why? Let me see, let me look into your life. Well, I've got problems with at home. I've been dumped. I've been fired. Things are not working out. I'm not really getting along with people, and this really makes sense to me. Right? Very innocent. What do you say? Sorry, but you need to go back and to resolve all of your stuff into the world with your parents, with this, with that, until you're a mature manusha, until you're a mature thinking being. Then come back into this teaching. So finally, Krishna is saying, know where you stand, apply the right sadhana, whatever that sadhana is for you. In fact, we don't need to tell you what to do, because you know what to do already. Know where you stand. Are you projecting? Right? Are you attached to knowledge? Are the moments where you're just not able to think? Right? There's a blurriness about thinking. Depending on what your composition is, find the right sadhana. Maybe meditation more. Maybe more, maybe some creative works, maybe poetry, maybe yoga asana, maybe pranayama, right? Maybe socializing, whatever it is, you already know that. The right sadhana, do it so that your mind can purify itself. So you may understand this knowledge when it is given to you. When it's provided, you understand it immediately. So that's how much to do the sadhana, only as much as you recognize your unity, and you generally experience your oneness with the world. Not just talking about it, oh yeah, I'm one with the world. It's genuine fullness, resorting mind back to the self. It's not just, oh, okay, yeah, I've done it, yeah, great. It's kind of boring to be aware. It's not like that. If your mind's really pure, if you've really done your work, the fullness of the self, nothing tops it in this world. No wife, no husband, no boyfriend, no girlfriend, nothing in this world tops the fullness of yourself. And where is that found? Right now, right here. And what's obstructing it? The mind. And who's got control of the mind? The intellect. And where's the intellect? In our minds. Therefore, we ourselves are the ones that are capable of bringing this into full fruition through our work, through our hard work. Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhaved. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.